We are starting a brand new series today, so if this is your first time here, perfect timing. My name is Philip. I'm the pastor here at GCC, and we're so glad that you're here. And I won't lie to you, there was a lot of anxiety for me this week because Easter was awesome, and then there's the rest of the year. So I wasn't sure if anybody else was going to join us today. I'm really glad that you chose to. You had a lot of places you could be on this beautiful, beautiful day. I mean, the Masters is today. There's baseball on. The Braves are 5-0. Just thought I'd throw that in there. I'm not a fair weather fan. I was there for Dale Murphy, Bob Horner back in the 80s and the terrible years before they even did well. Just so you know, I felt like I needed to justify myself with that. But you're here, and I'm excited. One of my favorite things to preach about is worship. Obviously, the number one thing I enjoy preaching about is salvation. I think that's just... If you meet a pastor who doesn't enjoy preaching about salvation, you probably need to meet another one. But worship is one of my top 3 things to preach on. And so we're going to do a quick little 3-week series here on worship. And you might be thinking, that's cool, I'm not a music guy. That's not true. And beside the point, it's more than just music. Worship, absolutely, music is a big part of our worship, especially here in our Western culture, in the United States, especially in the South. We love our music in the South. We love our songs. As a matter of fact, churches have dissolved and split over what kind of music is played. Once upon a time, they didn't have drums or guitars, the devil's instrument, in churches. Which is really funny to me because when I hear organs, which that one's not plugged up, but if we could figure out how to use it, we might. When I hear organs, I think of baseball, and I don't say that jokingly, I really do. Every time I go into a church and I hear like, it's like I want to stand up and cheer, go Braves, or start the chop or something. That's just my brain and how it works. What's really funny about music in church is that I grew up in an era where and most of you did as well, where you had certain songs you sang, and you sang them a certain way, and that was it. There was no discussion about it, and if anybody did it differently, they could find somewhere else to be. And many people found somewhere else to be, whether voluntarily or forced. And so that was what I had grown up in, and then I learned in college that many of the hymns that I'd grown up singing and being told we can't do those choruses or those new songs or use those new instruments because it's the devil's, that many of the hymns came from old bar tunes. Like they had words and they just put it to the songs they were already singing in the pubs because everybody knew those songs and they knew the tunes to them. So they just put religious words with the songs they already knew. And I felt like betrayed. I wanted to go find some of those white hairs that had fussed at me for thinking about the guitars and the new songs. I'm like, your songs are bar songs. You drunk? You know, something like that. I wouldn't say that. But I was young and dumb and not a lot of filters in my mouth, even less than today, if that should scare you. But that's the thing is like, whether you consider yourself a worshiper or a music person, you don't know it, but you really are. You really are a musical person, even if you can't carry a tune in a bucket. And many of you can't, and I love you. And you just sing, y'all. Just scream it out. It's good. We're all good. You know, the Bible calls you to make a joyful noise unto the Lord, not a joyful note. That's an important thing. It's an important delineation to make. But here's the thing. You don't realize that the soundtrack that of your life matters. Like, have any of you ever wish you had like a personal soundtrack as you walk around in life? Do you ever pretend you do? Do you ever play your phone in your pocket and just walk around by yourself and like you pretend you have a soundtrack to? Just me? Good. Okay. I mean, I never did that either. Yesterday, while I was cutting the grass. But the soundtrack, music matters. It matters more than you can even possibly know. And nowhere else is that found to be true than in movies. I don't know if you're a big movie person. I love movies. As a matter of fact, I love movies and I love movie soundtracks. Now, possibly one of the greatest films or cinematic pieces of film in all history, whether you're a sci-fi fan or not, is the Star Wars, what do we call it now? It's not a trilogy anymore. It's not even, it's what? Saga. Thank you, nerds. I love you. May need to adjust the budget for next week. But Star Wars is like, it changed the way movies are made, all of it. And there's this ending scene in one of the movies that music matters so much. It's the throne room scene. And just in case you aren't familiar, we're going to show you. This is the throne room scene, and it's powerful. Check it out. Now, that's just a minute of the throne room scene, okay? And there's all kind of awkward stuff in there. There's a couple of things you're thinking of. One, Harrison Ford, man, what a dog, right? He's just sly. And then two, anybody notice that Luke Skywalker kind of looks like Dwight Schrute from The Office? He does, doesn't he? Okay, but here's the thing. You don't realize how much music matters until the music's not there. Somebody, some genius, has come along and taken that same scene and removed the music, and you don't realize just how painful it is without the music. Check this out. How weird is that? All of a sudden that little wink is even like creepier, and why are you nodding at a robot? That's weird. It's just weird. And music matters so much. The first time I was ever shown this as Top Gun, another one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Highway to the Danger Zone, Playing with the Boys. Really strange song for a bunch of guys to sing. But that's a huge soundtrack. Somebody had taken the opening scene where Maverick and Goose and Cougar and... okay, I see I'm alone on this. This intense scene, and they took the music out, and it's just weird. And whether you consider yourself a musician or a singer, or you think you don't really care for music, it matters to you more than you realize. And as a matter of fact, when it comes to the worship of God, music is one of the greatest tools that we have to usher us into the presence of God. Throughout history, believers, and before we had Jesus, the Jewish people used music, and cultures all over the world use music as a way to unite each other and to focus their thoughts on a single thing. And we'll talk more about this in a couple of weeks, but I mean, the fall is coming, and we all have a fight song that we love. You all have lesser fight songs. I have the greatest fight song in the world, but we're united by that song. As a matter of fact, just think about the national anthem. I mean, everybody stands up. Everybody sings. It doesn't matter if they have a voice or not. You belt that thing out. Some of you don't even know the words, and you just watermelon it to death, whatever. But music matters to us more than we realize, and especially when it comes to worshiping our God. We just sat here and we sang these songs, and so many times in churches all across America, all across the globe, we sing words that we don't even realize we're saying to God, because God is supposed to be our audience. The band's not up here singing to you. You're not out there singing to the band. We're here uniting our voices for an audience of one, being God. And if we're truly saying things like, "It is well with my soul," no matter what comes, whatever trouble might come, "How great you are, God." I mean, these are incredibly powerful lyrics that we're lifting in song. But for some reason, we don't think about it like that. As a matter of fact, when it comes to worship, the human race is the only created being that thinks the creation exists for itself. We look around, and maybe not blatantly, maybe you don't think about it like in huge terms, but in some way, shape, or form, every single one of us are guilty of this. Selfishness is the ultimate act of idol worship. As a matter of fact, in Romans, it talks about this. I'm going to go Psalm first. Psalm 135, we're going to put this on the screen. Write this down for later, but you need to see this. Psalm 135, this is a problem that's been going on for centuries and millennia now. This is what Psalmist says in chapter 35. It says, "The idols of the nations are silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths but do not speak. They have eyes but do not see. They have ears but do not hear, nor is there any breath in their mouths. Those who make them become like them, and so do all who trust in them." And so the question becomes, like, what is an idol? Like, they say that the idols of the nations are like silver and gold. They're made like birds and things like that. And it's kind of difficult to identify some idols. Look at what Paul says in Romans chapter 1. He says this, for although they knew God, he's speaking of people who were exposed to the truth of Jesus, who've been exposed to the preaching of the gospel. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. He continues, claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Now, I'm not saying this is the truth, but I just want you to think about the mascots of our sports teams. Lots of birds, lots of creeping things, lots of mortal men. We lift these things up, and I'm not saying if you like a sports team that you're an idol worshiper, but the truth is we all are guilty of idol worship. And so we have to start thinking, okay, well, how do I identify things that maybe have too much of the attention of my heart? How do I start recognizing the things that I've allowed to become idols in my life? And here's an easy question. If anything were removed from your life and you winced at it, you probably have a little too much idol worship going on. If it's a relationship, if it's a job, if it's a hobby, just think about this question. If the United States government came and said that you're not allowed to gather on Sunday mornings for church, there'd probably be a pretty big uproar, right? You know, lots, especially down here in the South, we'd be going crazy because we love our church services. How much more of an uproar would there be if the United States government came and said the NFL is illegal? I mean, you're talking money, you're talking about people all over the country. They would go berserk. You think you've seen a rally or some crazy protests? Just think about NFL. Think about Philadelphia Eagle fans. You don't have to go any further than that. If you're an Eagle fan, then you know. You're not offended, you know. They would go crazy. They start throwing batteries at the White House. They'd be going nuts. So if I were to come and I was going to remove something from your life, anything that would cause you to go, I don't know about that, that's probably a little too close to an idol in your life. Just think about the things that you do on a daily basis. One preacher told me one time, he said, I can tell you what you worship if you give me your checkbook, which we don't have those anymore, your checkbook and your day planner, which we don't have those anymore. So the new thing is, give me your phone. I can tell what you worship if I look at your phone. If we were to take away text message from your life, teenagers, Snapchat, social media, the internet. Now you're thinking, Philip, well, that's just not fair. Business has changed and we have to have the... No, we don't have to have the web. What are the idols in our lives? And how did we allow them to become idols? Well, the problem with worship for you and I, and the problem with idols in our lives is that far too often we view worship through our perspective of our life instead of viewing it through God's perspective on his story. We view worship through our perspective on our life instead of God's perspective on his story. Because the truth is that you and I, this isn't our story. We're just playing our part in his story. This grand cinematic feature that we call life, it's not about us. As a matter of fact, the thing we celebrated last week, it's not even about us. Easter's not about us. It's about God. It's about God glorifying himself the most greatly. That Jesus came not just to save those who were lost. He came to glorify his Father in the greatest way possible. And the greatest way possible to glorify God was to redeem God's children in only a way that God could. That is God's story, the glory of God. And our worship, as one pastor, Louis Giglio, puts it, our worship, the way we respond to God, is the soundtrack to the story of God. You've got to start thinking about worship in a different way. It's not, are they going to sing a song I like? Are they going to do a new song? Is Brogan going to sing? Is he going to sing more? Who's going to be singing with them? Why is Philip still playing a guitar? Can he let go? Is he a control freak? What's the deal? It's none of that. It's, am I going to get in my seat? It's too hot in here. It is. We're working on it. The ceiling going to cave in on us because sometimes it feels like it. What's with all the chandeliers? How many times have you counted the bulbs that are out? Don't do it today because now I've distracted you. But we've got to change our thinking about worship, because worship should happen in here. Yes, it should happen in every church building across the world, but it should happen so much more when we leave the building. Think about the movies that you like, and think about the songs that you like from the movies. I own a few soundtracks. I own the soundtrack to, obviously, Top Gun. I actually don't own Star Wars. I own Jurassic Park. You guys remember Jurassic Park? It's a great soundtrack. Far and Away, great Irish story. I own a few others. Toy Story is a great soundtrack. Possibly one of the greatest soundtracks of all time for movies is Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump captures history, doesn't it? Songs throughout the decades that just kind of take you right to that point. And if you start thinking about our musical worship here and your musical worship outside of here as the soundtrack to God's story, it should do just the same thing in your heart and mind. It should take you back to the faithfulness of God. It should take you back to the wonder and the greatness of God. Like David says, remind me of the joy of your salvation. It should be a reminder of the moment that the lights turned on, that the Holy Spirit breathed new life into you, that you truly understood the salvation of Jesus. You should be overcome with joy, remembering that moment. That's what worship is supposed to be. It's supposed to be our lives. And when you start thinking about creation, instead of creation existing for us, that creation exists for the glory of God, that all creation is resounding with noise as the soundtrack of God's story. You think about the waves on the ocean, and every crash of every wave is the applause for the God of heaven. Every bird singing in the sky is a melody praising God in heaven. Every sound you hear and everything you see, every sway of every branch, every flower that blooms this spring season, the scent of cut grass is the aroma of applause to God and His great story. This is worship. We are actively involved in the soundtrack of God's story. We are not just worshiping, we are the worship of God. And just after God had taken His people through such a great trial, He takes Moses up on a mountain and gives him rules. And the first rule is to make sure that our worship is not derailed. In Exodus chapter 20, it says this, verse 3, "You shall have no other gods before me." That is the first guideline for worship. Nothing else comes before me. Not your family, not your spouse, not your job, not your team. Nothing. Not your church, not your small group, not your children. No other gods before me. He continues. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." Worship not only is the great soundtrack to the story of God, it's the first helpful guideline and boundary for us from getting away from God. if we immerse ourselves in a lifestyle of worship, if we are worshiping constantly, that keeps us from sin because it keeps us in this constant state of adoration, glorifying God, reminding ourselves of what He's done for us, of how far we've fallen from Him, of how great He's gone for us. Worship is the first safety net for our lives in God. And we know this to be true as well. That when we start worshiping well, when we start worshiping properly, we start viewing worship with the right lens, through the right perspective, that right worship leads to right thinking about God. Right worship leads to right thinking about God. Because if you don't live your life in a state of worship, if you don't worship God constantly, you start allowing the circumstances of life to crash in on you. And life gets tough. Some of you had a crappy week. My kids did, because I was a terrible father this week. I just was in a bad mood. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was allergies or I'm just a miserable person. And so when we start judging and validating the success or the accuracy, or I don't even know the word, that if we start viewing our life through our circumstances, we will all have a miserable life. Even the wealthiest man will tell you, hey, that's not what does it. And only when we start seeing life through the perspective of God on His story, we start thinking about worship properly, will we see God and understand God in a greater way, in a proper way. We start putting Him first. We start worshiping well. So that's the challenge this week. And you know what? That's not just the challenge this week. That's the challenge today. In just a minute, I'm going to ask the band to come back up, and we're going to sing one of those songs again. Because I believe this. I believe that some of us need a second chance at it. Some of us walked in with some baggage on our shoulders. Some of us walked in with some junk. Something coming up, something we're going through. We need another chance just to let it go. We need another chance to stop viewing our lives and through our perspective. We start looking at God and trusting Him, worshiping Him for who He is, not what we have or what He's not given us. The song we're going to sing, we sang just a few minutes ago, It Is Well. In case you don't know the story, this man lost his family in a tragic boat accident, storm, and so he goes on a boat to go to the place where he had lost his children and his wife. And he pens this song in the area that he had lost his family. You think about the sea billows roll. He's talking about the death of his family. I don't know what you're walking through. I don't need to know. I don't want to lessen its intensity or its pain. But I know that when we start worshiping God properly, when we start right worship leads to right thinking of God, because so many times we only worship when we feel close to God, or we only worship when we feel like things are in line. And it's in those times of difficulty and times of pain and times of confusion that we need most to right ourselves with God. So as the band comes, I'm going to pray. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just stand up where you are. If you close your eyes and bow your heads, just for a moment, I want you to think about the stuff you've got going on. Good, bad, confusing, difficult, happy. I want you to say, God, I want you to have my full attention, just in your heart, whether you believe in Him or not. If you're here today and you don't believe in God, this is a great opportunity for you to invite Him to show Himself to you today. But if you're a believer, if you've been living this life, this is a great opportunity for us to realign ourselves with Him, to start right worshiping, right thinking about God. Give Him the rest of your day. Offer the rest of your day to Him and His His agenda. Your week, your job, your family, your spouse, your friends, your school. Jesus, you hear us today. Lord, we ask that you would hear our song, you would hear our hearts, you'd hear our prayers, and they would be a great applause to the glory that you deserve. That we love you and we trust you. God, help us to believe more. Hear the hearts of your people this morning, those who are hurting, those who are struggling. Help them to see who you are, that you're constant. You're the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Lord, we love you. I pray this in your name. Amen.